The Vikings were tough, hairy, horned helmet warriors, right? They raided and pillaged all over Europe, taking their plunder back to their great hall where they ate, drank, and made merry. Or maybe you think of them as fierce but noble, honorable fighters who lived for adventure and glory on the high seas. But what if I told you that actually neither of those things were really true? What if the Vikings were actually kind of boring? Hey there, welcome to my channel. Here are 5 reasons why you'd find the Vikings surprisingly boring. Number 1. The Vikings didn't wear helmets with horns. There's no evidence that the Vikings ever wore horned helmets. The idea comes from a 19th century Danish artist named Johan Romeling, and it's since become so ingrained in our culture that we don't even question it anymore. But there's never been a single archaeological find to confirm that this was ever a thing. In fact, modern recreations of Viking helmets are often deliberately designed without horns, because, based on the historical record, that's probably how they looked. The reason that this is so disappointing is that horned helmets would have been pretty cool. They may not have been very practical, but they would certainly look impressive. So the fact that they were never used by the Vikings means that we can never get the awesome horned helmets that we all want. Another element of Viking garb that has no basis in reality is the white linen undergarments worn by both men and women. This comes directly from a 19th century French painting called The Death of Ragnar Lothbrok, which depicts the legendary Viking as wearing basically nothing but a loincloth and a hat. It's since become a staple of Viking cosplay, but it's just not accurate. We know that the Vikings wore some kind of underwear, because there are references to such garments in Old Norse literature. But these were almost certainly practical items made out of leather or wool, like the rest of their clothing. No delicate linen here, but honestly, that's okay, because if everyone's running around in linen, it's going to make it really difficult to keep your cool in a battle. 2. Most Vikings weren't actually Vikings. The term Viking itself originally referred to a Scandinavian seafaring warrior. However, it's now often used to refer to anyone from Scandinavia during the Viking Age, which lasted from the 8th to the 11th centuries AD. So technically, there were actually only about 3 centuries in which the Vikings were doing their thing. But it turns out that most people living in Scandinavia at the time weren't exactly big on the whole raiding and pillaging thing. In fact, during the height of the Viking Age, raids on coastal communities across Europe were actually declining. The number of Scandinavian longships found along the coast of Britain, for example, goes down significantly after the 9th century. It seems that as trade increased, so did the cost of living. And while ransoms paid by coastal towns continued to rise, so did the price of the goods that the Vikings could purchase with that money. So it turns out that if you wanted to be an actual Viking, you had to be fairly wealthy. Because you did need enough money to outfit yourself and a crew of fellow adventurers for months at sea. And that kind of makes sense, because if you're poor and you go adventuring, you're probably not coming home with much to show for it. So, while you might technically be a Viking, you're not much of a Viking, if you know what I mean. 3. Even though the Vikings explored a lot of North America, they never actually settled any part of it. So, despite the fact that the Vikings established a settlement in Newfoundland, Canada, around 500 years before Christopher Columbus arrived, there doesn't seem to have been any real desire on their part to actually stay. In fact, we know very little about this settlement because it was completely abandoned shortly after it was founded. There are a few possible reasons for this. One is that the Norsemen found the local indigenous people to be a bit aggressive, as contemporary accounts mention fighting with the Skrellings, which is the name given by the Vikings to the natives of North America. However, another theory suggests that the reason for abandoning the settlement was quite the opposite. According to this view, the Vikings actually got along well with the local population and intermarried with them, which led to the gradual abandonment of the colony. Either way, it seems that the Norsemen didn't stick around in North America, because they either didn't like the locals or they liked them too much. So let that be a lesson to you. When traveling to distant lands, try not to fight the natives or fall in love with them too much, because then you may never come home. If you're enjoying this video and you want to see more like it, please remember to subscribe. It's free and it helps my channel tremendously. 4. The Vikings weren't exactly noble warriors. If you've seen the movie How to Train Your Dragon, then you're probably aware that the Vikings had a bit of a reputation for being incredibly greedy, selfish, and just generally not very nice people. In the film, they reportrayed as mindless marauders who attack anyone who crosses their path just because they can get some plunder. Now, this isn't too far from the truth, because the Vikings were, in fact, known for their brutality. But there's more to the story than that. See, the Viking ethos valued strength above all else. And it wasn't just physical strength that they admired, but also mental toughness and resourcefulness. The Vikings believed that life was ultimately meaningless, and that when you died, that was it for you. So, if you were able to live life to its fullest and die with honor, then you'd done all you could. And in many ways, this outlook actually made the Vikings into some of the greatest explorers and traders of their day. Because they knew that there was no risk too great, no voyage too long, and no enemy too powerful to avoid. But it's precisely this belief in the ultimate meaninglessness of life that explains why the Vikings could be so incredibly cruel. If there was no hope of an afterlife, then why bother being merciful to your enemies? And 5. If you think about it, the Vikings weren't exactly brave. I mean, wouldn't you agree that charging into battle against an enemy with a sword and shield is pretty dang scary? Well, it turns out that the Vikings didn't do this at all. Instead, they preferred to charge into battle on horseback, armed with bows and arrows. Not only was this safer for them, but it allowed them to pick their battles. That is, they could choose when to engage an enemy rather than having to defend themselves against someone who ambushed them. This approach to combat was made possible by the use of horses, because, unlike their neighbors, the Vikings kept their horses well fed so that they could survive long journeys carrying packs full of supplies and goods. This meant that they could travel light and fast, making them much more versatile than other warriors of their time. Plus, if they lost a battle, they could simply ride away and live to fight another day. And hey, there's nothing wrong with preferring to fight from horseback while shooting arrows at your enemies, right? Except that this is actually incredibly boring. Imagine spending a couple of centuries being attacked by guys on horses who shoot arrows at you and then run away. You'd be so demoralized that you'd probably just give up and start building a horse stable. So, if you wanted to be a Viking, you had to be strong and ruthless. But you also couldn't be a chicken. You had to be willing to take risks and explore uncharted waters. But you also couldn't fall in love with the locals. Oh, and you also had to be willing to dress terribly. Sorry, I guess that last one's not so bad. Thank you so much for watching. Which of these facts surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments. And while you're down there, please remember to subscribe. It's free and it helps my channel tremendously. Also, if you want to learn more about history for yourself, then check out the links in the description below. Until next time, remember, history is boring.